Hello, welcome back to the Foz podcast or Friends of Zeus podcast, whatever you want to call it. We are now doing episode 165. Tonight we have a guest who reached out to me on matchmaker.fm. I'll give them a shameless plug, whatever. Um, and he had an interesting concept that I'm kind of a comic book fanboy, and of course we've got all these things going on in society, and he wanted to kind of compare literature and society and do it from a perspective of Superman. And I'm guessing we're going to talk about the changes in Superman over the years and how he matched up over the 60s, the 70s, and kind of that'll be driving it. Is that a fair assessment, Quinn?
Yes, as well as talking about changes or choices made in the adaptations. So, how do the adaptations render the character and how do they relate back to the comics and the cultural perception?
Good, good. Well, I
Cool.
guess I'll throw the reins to you and let you get rolling on what you want to talk about.
Well,
Okay.
hey, Zeus,
Yes,
hang
sir.
on a second. Zeus, do you want to introduce Quinn or have Quinn introduce himself or
Yeah,
how do you know?
actually, yeah. Quinn, tell
Sure.
us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you.
I did want to ask, do you have a podcast? Because I saw the Bang 2-3, but I didn't feel like that was your show.
No, that is not my show.
Okay.
So hi, I'm Quinn Q, writer, creator, speaker. I am a screenwriter primarily. I also write scripts for comics. Nothing published as of yet, but we're working on that. I think I can't speak about it just yet, but I'm working on something that might actually, go the distance in one of those two domains. But
Cool.
I don't have a podcast of my own, but I am a happy guest on shows like y'all's.
Mhm.
And I talk about storytelling, media, popular culture, a little bit of politics. I try to keep it focused on the creative just because sometimes I know you guys, can get very political here. It can be difficult to cut through the noise when you're talking about politics. So I
Mhm.
try to keep it more toward the cultural side. So that way we have a way in that doesn't immediately get people's hackles up, at least hopefully.
Well, just on that note, if you do get political, if we disagree, we're going to say it. We're not going to yell at you. We're not going to finger point. We're not going to do any of that. I
Mhm.
think we've been pretty good over. I mean, we've had a couple episodes with our friends where we get a little heated, but I think overall we're willing to accept, well-based arguments on
Mhm.
political stuff. So don't shy away from it.
Cool.
Say what you're going to say. If we disagree,
Mhm.
we'll say something, and maybe
Mhm.
it'll take the topic in a different direction.
Sure.
But we'll do that. Cool.
All right.
Cool.
And it's also nice taking a break from political stuff
Yes.
once in a while.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
Very nice, actually.
Mhm.
Hey
We
guys, just to check, can you guys hear me okay?
I can
absolutely.
hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, cool. No, thank you. My microphone kept doing something. Okay, cool. Thanks.
All right. So should I just let her rip?
Yeah,
Let her
Yeah, go
rip.
sure.
for it,
All
Quinn.
right. Cool. So we're talking about Superman, and I'm sharing my screen here. Not sure what'll be, the audience will be able to see, but I have a little PowerPoint. So I'm talking about Superman, and we're going to start with who he is and what he is. He is obviously a comic book character, a superhero, the first superhero, debuted in Action Comics #1 in 1938.
Hmm.
So starting out, this is interesting. Some little bit of trivia. Some people don't know. Starting out, he was actually a bit more of a hard-nosed, no nonsense hero. I wouldn't go quite as far as to say anti-hero because that concept wasn't even like fully defined back then, but he was very much a take no prisoners kind of guy. This was back in the early days of comics and, like, again, first superhero comics. So the rules as far as what you could or couldn't do weren't as heavily solidified. He did, like, seen in the picture, that iconic cover where he's got the car, he would, you know, damage property. He would rough people up. Some of the bad guys even died. Uh, Over time, that
Did they
relaxed, that
kill?
softened. Oh,
Wait,
good.
he killed in the early comics? Because that's been kind of his.
Right. He has a
Uh,
no. Yeah. Famously has a no-kill rule that was established after the Comics Code Authority came in.
Mhm.
So just kind of set the stage, right?
like Silver Age.
Yeah. Very early Silver Age, late Golden Age. So basically, to set the stage, he and a lot of the other heroes started out. Batman was the same way. They started a little rough and tumble. There weren't a lot of like hard and fast rules. And then a few things happened. Number one, we had a book called Seduction of the Innocent, written by Dr. Frederick Wortham, come out that was kind of like a deconstruction slash expose of superhero comics from a psychological and cultural and political perspective. And he made the argument, among other things, that Superman is an authoritarian, Batman and Robin are gay, and Wonder Woman is a BDSM lesbian. Now, ironically, there was a little bit more basis for that third one than the first two. Um, but the comic publishers decided to react because the government was going to crack down on them. That was the thinking, because
Wow.
at this time, comic books were the equivalent of like YouTube. Like everybody read comics. All the kids read comics, even some of the adults. So they did not want to have a government crackdown. They did not want to have like actual like hardcore censorship. So they censored themselves. They instituted rules for their characters. So Superman, Batman, etc. They would not kill. They would tone down some of the more harsh or outlandish plot points, and that's where we go from a more hard-edged Superman to a more kind of all-American good guy. And as we go from the Golden Age to the Silver Age, we see that the central idea of the character is just, I am good. I am better. I not, better in an arrogant way, but better in like, I am trying to be what we all should be. I'm trying to be a symbol. And so that pretty much carried through from the silver to the bronze age. So we're going all the way up to like the 70s and 80s.
I have
And
a
at that
question.
point, oh,
Real
Mike,
quick
what's up?
question.
Oh,
I'll be the voice of people that don't know a lot about comics because I
please.
conveniently don't know a lot about comics. I mean, there's certain
Mhm.
ones I do. Can
Yeah,
you just put some quick dates on gold, silver, bronze age? Like what times are we
sure.
talking
Sure.
about?
All right. So roughly, the golden age starts with the late 1930s, a little bit earlier, technically. Some people say it starts before superheroes, but superheroes, they're definitely what makes American comic books big. So
Mhm.
the 1930s into, I would say, the mid 1940s. Some people put different dates to the beginning of the Silver Age, but a lot of people say that
Post
it
war.
uh, a lot of people say that it starts with the first appearance of Barry Allen, who is the second version of the character known as the Flash.
Yeah.
I believe that wasn't in Flash comics because that was already canceled. It was a different series that he was actually guest. I think it was Sensational something or other, but he was like, it was an anthology series. It was supposed to be like a one shot that he appeared in like the fourth issue of, but it hit. So that character really worked. And again, at that point, we're well into the Comics Code era, well into like a certain kind of self-censorship, house style, all-American heroes. And so what Superman represents, and to be fair, a lot of the characters at this time were a little bit samey, especially on the DC side. Superman, Batman, Green Lantern, Flash. They didn't really develop like clear, distinct personalities until a little bit later. They were all just kind of like generic good guys. But what
Mm.
Superman represented was he's got the most superpowers, he's a big name, and he's an all American. He's Clark Kent, Kansas farm boy, comes to Metropolis to become a reporter. That's his secret identity. And in both his superhero guys and his working life, he's always principled, trying to do the right thing. So that's like his core. And that stays pretty consistent all the way up to Silver Age is about like, let's say 40s to 70s ish,
Oh, okay.
mid 70s. Yeah. So Silver Age is a long span of time. Like, and then the Bronze Age, it's called, used to be called the Early Modern Age, but they changed it. The Bronze Age starts in the 70s, and that's where you start to see these personalities actually be more distinct with the characters. There's this.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Would the Bronze Age be post 1940?
Oh yeah, well after that. Well after that.
So I wanted to bring up because there was this is something I know about Superman. I found kind of it's funny. There's Max. I want to say his name is Max Fleischman, the guy that did Popeye. Max Fleischman. So there were a series of cartoons that came out, and one of them was called Japateurs, and it was Superman fighting the Japanese, and they were going to fly a blimp into a city. A very, very, prophetic considering what happened in 2001. And then there was another one where he fights, like straight up fights Hitler, and I just thought it was something. The reflection to society at the time is something that can't go unnoticed, like how he's changed over the decades. But I always thought that was hilarious that he's just fighting a bunch of Japanese guys, and it was all just for like to build up the soldiers, what I mean? It was just like he's a hero and he's American, and I always found it interesting that in the early ones, like the George Reeves. That era of Superman,
the TV series, yes,
yeah, it was truth, justice, and the American way, but he's from Krypton,
right? Well, yeah, he's an American character. He's an American symbol, American superhero, and yeah, so like I'm sort of fast forwarding a little bit because, and Zeus and I had talked sort of behind the scenes about this a little bit. We could talk about the Silver Age in terms of the sort of cultural goings on like outside of the comics and how those influenced what was in like buy war bonds or the war efforts and like we're gonna
get Lucky Strikes.
yeah exactly. We're gonna get those krauts and get those kill knock out Hirohito and Hitler and Mussolini. But ironically, while that is interesting metatextual stuff and like interesting in terms of the time, it doesn't have a lasting impact on the character. Like the lasting impact is just like you said, like the all-American thing, which it started arguably late Golden Age and definitely through that period with the war, with the Second World War and out. But that honestly, the core of Superman was pretty much solidified with the idea of he doesn't kill, he has all these powers, he is a big name. Like Superman in Action Comics has basically always been in print. There have been like relaunches and renumberings and whatnot, but he's never been out of print for a number of reasons, including the fact that he's one of the, like Mickey Mouse, he's one of those copyright, shiesty characters where the owners have to keep him in print in certain ways for, ever, basically to make sure they don't lose the rights. But his essence has basically always been, post Golden Age sort of like, rough and tumble guy has always been, I'm good, I do what's right, I try to be a symbol for others. And so as we get yeah, exactly. The Big Blue Boy Scout. And so as we get into the Bronze Age and we start to see things like there's a series, Hard Traveling Heroes, Green Arrow, Green Lantern, where you start to see, for example, the character of Green Arrow, Oliver Queen. He went from being a Batman clone, like literally he had a teen sidekick, he had an arrow cave, he had an arrow car, he had an arrow plane, and all this stuff based off of Batman. yeah, based off of Batman. But with an arrow theme. Like he's Batman, but he's Robin Hood somehow. But they sort of like tamped down those aspects and played into the idea like, what if he's Robin Hood and what if he's like a bleeding heart lefty? And then they contrasted him with Hal Jordan, Green Lantern, who's more of a centrist. But in doing that, written by and illustrated by Neil Adams, they were able to flesh out these characters and their personalities to the point where later on, when they would interact in the Justice League, and when you see Barry Allen, who is also a friend of Hal Jordan, you see the contrast there, where Barry is more of like a moderate conservative. He's literally a cop. He works for the police department. He's a CSI, basically, police scientist. And Ollie is not a fan. So like you got to see their personalities come out. And Superman's personality at this point, 70s, 80s, is like, again, big blue Boy Scout, good guy. That's his whole deal. And so as we go into the Bronze Age, we start to see the all-American stuff come through a little bit more in the sense of John Byrne, a writer who was tasked with
Man of Steel.
Exactly, the Man of Steel relaunch comic series that John Byrne did after the Crisis on Infinite Earths storyline. So this is getting a little in the weeds, but basically, like, just imagine that at a certain point, the universe, the DC Comics storyline, it had to reset. And as part of that reboot. And so as part of that reset, John Byrne was brought in to write a new origin for Superman and to kind of carry the character forward into the new era, then the new era, the 80s.
And I think, Quinn, I could be wrong, but I read the comics back in the 80s. I still have my copies of that 6-issue miniseries. Didn't they also, in a sense, and I don't want to get too into the weeds because you and I, just from what I'm hearing, could probably do this all night if I wasn't so tired. Didn't they also sort of dampen Superman's powers a little bit to make him a little more?
Yeah, I remember that.
A little more vulnerable, a little more defeatable. Yes. Okay, I seem to remember that. Yeah.
So
they did a revamp on his strengths. Like he could fly out of the atmosphere, but his strength was not like fly around the world and change time level.
So basically, another problem with the Silver Age, and this is why like I kind of sort of like rushed over it a little bit, is that they got a little more than a little ridiculous with things, because the Silver Age was just the story. The point of the Silver Age was just like telling, firstly, with the war effort, trying to be responsive and responsible and be good Americans and all that. But then after the war effort, just tell fun, good stories. And like that's where Batman, for example, got really silly, and that's what led to the Batman TV series being basically like a bit zow bam parody almost of comic books and superheroes. And so Superman at that time, exactly, the Batusi and all that. So Superman at that time is like, he's moving planets. He's, flying so fast that, he zips, past the speed of light. So he's racing the Flash. More recently, again, post Byrne, I think John Byrne himself came up with this idea of the specialist rule, which basically is like, if a character has one thing they're really good at, they get to win. Like they get to win a head-to-head. So like if it's Superman and Barry Allen or Superman and Wally West and the Flash in a race, the Flash gets to win because he's a specialist. And so they pulled back on a lot of that ridiculous, like, overpowered stuff, because they're trying to tell more also like grounded and mature stories. This is also around the same time that Frank Miller was getting on the scene, Alan Moore was getting on the scene, the British Invasion, a lot of other writers that were trying to tell more elevated stories. Like, think how with the Harry Potter books, they started out being for kids because they were for kids, and the protagonists were like 12 years old, and then over time J.K. Rowling adjusted and made them more like YA, mature teen themed, because the characters and the audience grew up. And so that was kind of the idea with the superhero comics. Like, what the guys is growing up, there's been people who've been reading these again from all the way back into the 30s, the 40s, etc. They're teenagers, 20 somethings, adults now. So let's make this a little more mature. And so they tamped down his powers. They got rid of some of the more ridiculous stuff. I think they eliminated like 90% of the kryptonite on the planet, so you wouldn't be able to like find like kryptonite on like any like random beach or whatever, to make it a little less ridiculous, because people were finding kryptonite all the time during the Silver Age. But anyway, so again, the central tenet of the character remains the same, even while Green Arrow's changing, even while Batman's going from being like doing the Batusi to being the Dark Knight detective and all grim and gritty. Superman is still, his core is still remaining the same, even as things change around him. He goes from being a newspaper reporter to being a television reporter. He gets a different boss, all different things. Lex, gets his hair back. He dies, comes back to life. All this stuff, but Superman is still pretty consistent. So as we go into the 90s, one of the things that starts to come up is like, and this is what we call the modern age of comics. One of the things that starts to come up is like, is Superman kind of hacky? Is Superman kind of, boring, the big blue Boy Scout, all that? And a really poignant story by Kurt Busiek called "What's So Funny About Truth, Love," about Truth, Love, and Understanding, about truth, justice, and the American way, was him trying to kind of say like, no, Superman still works even in this time of like grim and gritty, because in the 90s there's a lot of like really edgy stuff. There was Spawn, there was Jim Lee, there was Rob Liefeld, there's all kinds of stuff going on in the industry. There's people trying to be like Sam or Frank Miller clones, Alan Moore clones. Does Superman still work in this time? It's like, yeah, he works. He's the contrast. He's the counter programming. He's not Batman. That's the point. And
if I may, he's kind of become. If you're into the media of comics at all, he's kind of become a big representation of like what we should be like. Again, kind of the Boy Scout thing. Now, in my opinion, from the 90s on was when he got better and better. Just from there on, like, Death of Superman was a fucking, like, that was big news. Like, you can't kill Superman. He's Superman.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like the recent movie, I'm a huge Man of Steel fan. I think that movie was terrific. In so many ways. In one, and I hope I'm not jumping ahead of you, but
no worries.
When he kills Zod in that movie, I thought that was one of the greatest things ever, because he was always the no-kill rule. Outside of your 1930s, where he probably killed a few people, but for the most part,
sure, modern Superman doesn't kill people. Exactly, that's a big thing.
One rule is he doesn't kill people, and then that was him. Like, for me in that movie, that was him choosing his new home and protecting them over his old home.
Right.
I thought that was a really nice change. I don't think a lot of people liked it, but that's fine. Characters have to evolve, and really, if the elements around you are evil and violent and awful, you're going to have to maybe do something to counter that, and it may be the same means as those evil, violent, awful people use. You follow what I'm saying? So, like,
I hear what you're saying.
To fight to the death. One of us is going to die. So he's like,
I hear what you're saying. I would push back a little bit, and we'll get there. I have a section I want to get to with adaptations. We're getting there, but so, and I'll just amend. It wasn't actually Kurt Busiek. Kurt Busiek wrote other Superman stories. The one I referred to actually was by Joe Kelly, who's also a great writer. But Man of Steel. The problem with Man of Steel, in my opinion, I'm not a fan. And that was written by David Goyer with some help from Christopher Nolan, and obviously directed by Zack Snyder. It didn't seem. Ironically, it does adapt some interesting parts of the Man of Steel, John Byrne stories, including the Kryptonian birthing chamber and the sort of like Kansas farm Americana, but then there's also like weird stuff like the tornado and Jonathan Kent just like basically committing suicide. And then the Zod's head snap. It's like, and I don't know if Goyer has spoken as much about this, or if maybe I just missed the interviews, but Snyder has spoken about this. It's like, well, one of the things we were thinking is if there's one rule that we have and you can't kill, we gotta like do that. It's just like,
I think it's great.
I get you. It feels a little too Rian Johnson, kind of like, well, let's just subvert for the sake of subversion. Like, but
what are the bad things that Rian Johnson did? Some of the Star Wars movies, right?
He did. The second one. He did
The Last Jedi. Was that what it was called?
Yes, The Last Jedi. And it's like the central theme of that is like everything we know is wrong. It's like,
Yeah.
I don't
That's
know.
a pretty crap movie. Yeah, yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
so that's how some people feel, a decent number of people feel about Man of Steel, because it's like, oh, everything you know is wrong, or let's just like break the golden rule. But we'll get there. So different writers have written the character different ways in the comics and the adaptations. Sticking with the comics for just a second, a thing that's come up more in we're jumping forward. We're going to skip a couple of decades, actually. We're jumping forward to like the 2010s and now. A recurring thing that has come up is like, well, what if we did like Superman, but he's a bad guy? And so it's like Injustice is
Oh,
a
that's a great series.
so again, edgy, right? I'm getting a sense for your taste, Zeus. So
Oh no, I
just
mean I know where you're coming from. I just like alternate stories, like what ifs.
Yeah,
What
what
if
if
was one of the
comics.
greatest Marvel
Right.
comics ever? What if
Right.
Spider-Man was a fucking murderer? You know, like I like
well, Spider-Man was the Punisher,
yeah,
which is a story.
I like those. I'm not taking away from the mythos that I've grown to love. I'm just saying I like to see a different spin from a
So you're talking about like Red Sun, where he's Russian, right? That kind
yeah,
of
that
thing.
was good.
Yeah, exactly. So Red Sun by Mark Millar is another example. So like, what if Superman, but edgier? What if Superman, but darker? What if Superman, but he's a dictator? So Red Sun back in the 2000s, then more recently Injustice. The problem with stories like that, and again, there's space for them. They're alternate universes, they're imaginary tales, outsourced, whatever we want to call them, is that if you do that too much, then this is where a phrase like I've come to a truism that I've come to say to people often when it comes to this kind of stuff is adaptations have consequences. I think I actually might have gotten enough of TV tropes, but like adaptations have consequences. And now Injustice started as a video game, so it's an adaptation. Red Sun started as a comic, but it was in Elseworlds. Man of Steel is an adaptation and a mainline adaptation. That's supposed to be like the main version of this character into BVS, into Justice League. And it's like, this is the main version that people are going to be, quote unquote, growing up on or seeing on the big screen for the first time since Superman Returns. And Superman Returns, for all of its problems, was literally trying to be let's see, let's just jump ahead. Let's go into adaptations. Adaptations. The first major Superman adaptations were actually the film serials and radio shows back in the Golden Age and Silver Age. That those actually helped to inform the character in some ways because they established things like, no, he doesn't just leap tall buildings; he can fly. That was a detail that the Fleischer cartoons, I believe, introduced. Fleischer cartoons are still like classic animation, really good. They hold up super well, by the way. Check those out. But I think either the radio series or the TV show, I believe it was the radio series, introduced kryptonite. X-ray vision, I believe, might have been something that came from one of the adaptations rather than the comics. It was originally, the idea was first like, I'm going to use my X-ray vision, or no, his X-ray vision started out in the comics, but then they expanded X-ray vision to be heat vision. It's like, I'm going to use my X-ray vision to heat something up, and they became heat vision. So all these things, this power set grows and grows, and this is when the Silver Age, where it's like, there's no rules on this stuff. You can kind of do what you want. You can give him a new power, every day of the week.
He can play the banjo.
Yeah, exactly. Super telepathy.
Yeah.
Super telekinesis. Super ventriloquism. That was actually super ventriloquism. Fun fact was like one of the explanations for why the Clark Kent disguise made sense. Because another detail, the Clark Kent disguise originally was, again, you see this in the Fleischer cartoons, it included a hat, included a fedora, back in the style of the time, which I think is relevant because a hat and glasses is a big difference between just glasses, right? It's like, oh, who's this guy?
Yeah, but generally he's seen as like a strikingly handsome guy.
Sure. Yeah,
That's
Superman is
always been a
strikingly
problem.
handsome. Superman is supposed to be super handsome with a spit curl and everything, and Clark Kent's just like a nerd. But
he
regardless,
still looks like the same guy.
Yeah, exactly. He looks the same guy.
Right.
Exactly. But point being, adaptations can have a really big influence. And so when we come to the 70s and to the Superman major motion picture with Christopher Reeve, they established or reestablished really a lot of core traits of the character. He is all about goodness. He doesn't kill. He shows mercy and grace to his enemies. He tries to do everything right. He tries to save everyone. If somebody dies, like he turns to he'll turn the world upside down to save, turn back time to save everybody's life and everything.
And
So
am I mistaken? Was not the first Superman movie directed by Coppola? Was that?
no,
Richard
it was,
Donner, I think.
yeah,
Rick-
Richard Donner. Yeah, Richard Donner directed
Okay.
both Superman 1 and 2. Superman
And it
2.
had Marlon Brando, which was
Marlon Brando came right off of Godfather. He came off of Godfather to do Superman, and I think what you might have heard is Mario Puzo did some touches on the script. Mario Puzo wrote The Godfather. Yeah. So, but Mario Puzo did some touches on the Superman script. But no, Coppola was not involved.
Okay.
At least that I'm aware of. But regardless, so the essence of the character comes through in that movie. Their version of Lex is a little bit of a departure. He's a businessman. He's kind of comedic. He wears a wig, but in general, he's all about real estate for some reason. But in general, a lot of the core concepts from the comics come through in that original movie and in that sequel. The other ones after, but we'll
hey, listen, I like the Richard Pryor one. I found it amusing.
Fair enough. But yeah, we'll focusing just on the core two, which everybody loves and remembers. It holds up. And so when he doesn't have a movie for a long time until Superman Returns in 2006, and that's literally like trying to do a warmed over version of that character played by Brandon Routh. I'm a fan of Ralph fan, by the way. Like, I think he got a raw deal and all that, but that's beside the point.
I do too.
But they're literally, again, they're trying to service the idea of the Richard Donner, Christopher Reeve movies, as well as just the essence of the character. So he's really good. He's trying to do the right thing, et cetera, et cetera.
It did feel like a throwback. Like when I remember seeing the return of, what year did that come out? I hate to put you on the spot. Do you guys remember?
Definitely the 90s.
Superman, which one? Return of what?
The Return of Superman. When did that come out?
Superman Returns, the film?
Yes.
Yeah, that was 2006. 2006.
Oh, really?
It was the same. Okay. It was, I believe, like the third or fourth season of the Smallville TV show. There was actually some consternation, like, can we have a Superman on TV and in film at the same time? But technically, though, Smallville was Superboy, but that's a whole other thing. But yeah.
Right.
It came out.
No, I remember seeing it, and it was almost shocking how, because again, this is 2006. So we're on the heels, we're in the throes of the war on terror and post 9/11 and
second term of Bush.
And we've already gone through the 90s with movie, like the comics obviously took a darker turn. You got into that, but even the movie industry, you had things in the 90s like Tarantino and David Fincher, right?
Yes.
And I remember seeing the return of, and it was so sort of innocent and it seemed like a pure throwback to the goodness of Superman and the evil, like Kevin Spacey as Lex Luthor was just so over the top, like, rubbing his hands together almost like super villain.
I'm the bad guy.
Yeah, it almost seemed like joyfully unrealistic compared to everything else that we were used to. And I think it got blasted for that too. I think it was almost like the innocence was lost. Like the audience wasn't ready to watch the 1970s Superman again. You know what I mean? So
I think what might have hurt it was that Batman Begins was a year before it, and that was showing
the dark side
pace, and it was so well received.
Yes.
That the timing might have had something to do with it. But the one thing I wanted to mention about the Brandon Routh is, he got a really beat up for it. Personally, I thought that he channeled, totally channeled Christopher Reeves. There were times where if you closed your eyes, you would think it was Christopher Reeves. Like he really, I guess would that be a method actor or no, not method.
Well, I don't think he, you could say he was doing an impression or he was embodying it. It was like a, sort of channeling. I think he also he made it his own in notable ways, and that's the thing. It's like they were trying to at the same time be a throwback, but also make it their own, which is a really difficult, way to thread the needle, way to skin a cat. And my whole thing is, it did okay servicing the legacy and not being too far field from the comics. I mean, there's the whole thing with his, spoilers, his illegitimate son, heavily implied, more or less confirmed, who's being raised by Lois with her new husband. I think it's Jason White, played by James Marsden. Notably, there's like a little bit of crossovers. Bryan Singer was directing it. Bryan Singer directed X-Men movies. James
Does
Marsden was
Marsden do
Cyclops.
anything but comic book movies?
He does. I mean,
he does a lot. He does a lot of things other than comics.
He actually he was in.
I'm joking.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah,
he's like Joe Handsome, every superhero guy. You know what I mean? Like
Cyclops also, side note, got a raw deal in X-Men. That's a whole other kettle of fish. So, basically, in general, tried to service the lore well, and the areas where it, I think, tried to diverge too much, as well as or try to like be too reverential to a previous film rather than to just like the straight comics, is I think where the problems may have hit that movie, as well as just like the timing and whatever. So adaptations have consequences. That didn't really hit, and so that really wasn't very impactful. But we jump all the way forward now to Man of Steel. Man of Steel, Zeus loved it. There's a whole people, there's the Snyderverse, the Snyder bros on the internet. There's a whole, group of people who love that movie, who love BVS, Batman vs Superman, the sort of erstwhile sequel or second installment, Justice League.
Like them all.
So the thing with that is, though, it's a Superman who, and again, good casting. Henry Cavill is a great casting choice, but he looks at the character, but he's saddled with a terrible script, first by Goyer and then with Chris Terrero, and I don't remember who. There's a bunch of people's hands. There's like 4 people's hands, including the directors, on the Justice League script. But it's just like that story is a mess. That characterization is a mess, and the problem comes with, do we understand this character, and are we trying to service that versus are we trying to just be different? Are we trying to Ryan Johnson it, or are we trying to Richard Donner it? And
I don't think that was the case. Zack Snyder is infamously a huge comic book nerd. He loves his comic books, and I think he liked the character, and he wanted to make changes to evolve him. Like James Gunn, as much as I like the stuff that he's done, like Guardians of the Galaxy, great movies, but Marvel has always been the like bright, sunny, bright colors, all this a little bit happier, and
at least the movies
stuff has been a lot darker. Mm-hmm. And I kind of
like since the recent separate. At least in the recent times, like Marvel was like killing it in the movies, like in the 2000s. Like DC wasn't even doing movies pretty much for most of the 2000s, except for Batman and one Superman movie. But when the MCU came on, especially after, I would say, Thor: Dark World, they pretty much, and maybe a little bit of the first Avengers, they pretty with some exceptions of the Avengers movies, which were kind of like disaster movies. In general, a lot of the Marvel movies were hewing, the Marvel Studios movies, the MCU movies, were hewing toward a more light tone for sure. And for some reason, DC and Snyder were deciding to do counter programming and have everything be more like dark. And unfortunately, that didn't work. Like we can like what we like. I always say like what you like, but at the end of the day, the market, if I can sound like a libertarian for a second, the market decides, and the market did not receive most of those movies very well. And so that's where the problems start. And so another example of a Superman adaptation that is kind of going the other way and has been very well received on television, ironically enough, is Superman and Lois, where again, it's bright.
Are you talking about the HBO one?
HBO Max. Also, I believe it's on the CW. Yeah, but
I've watched some of it. It's pretty good.
Yeah, wait a minute. Wait a minute. There's another
Superman TV show. Yes, Superman and Lois.
Because I remember, I think it was in the 90s, guys. That
there was Lois and Clark.
Lois and Clark. Sorry, Lois and Clark. Lois and Clark was the 90s. So I'll skip over a lot of TV just.
No, I'm just saying I was completely unaware that there was a current
Yes.
Superman show on HBO or whatever. Like that's
Yeah,
how
very
out of the
good.
loop I am, I guess,
I believe
apparently.
this is season 5, and this is confirmed the
Jeez.
final season. So basically, quick rundown on TV, just so we can cover it. George Reeves, obviously, back in the 20th century, I believe the 40s, and then fast forward, use our super speed 90s. Lois and Clark. I believe that was actually on CBS.
I thought it was ABC, but I could
Maybe
be wrong.
I think you're right. ABC. And
Smallville.
Smallville. Yeah, Smallville. Tom Welling, and then basically nothing. There was an embargo. Superman and Batman were embargoed. The Bat embargo is an infamous thing in television. They couldn't feature either of those characters because they were reserved for movies, and then eventually they relaxed that for Clark, not for Bruce. A little bit for Bruce. Technically, we could get into like the weeds of like Legends of Tomorrow and the CW and the Arrowverse, but basically you couldn't do Batman on TV. You still can't technically.
Yeah.
But they did Superman on TV in Supergirl and in the crossovers related to that, and then they were like, let's do a spinoff. And interestingly, the spinoff, fun fact, is also not canon to the Arrowverse. They decided to branch it off, and it's its own separate.
Another multiverse.
Yeah, it's its own. Yeah, it's its own separate thing. So it's not the Superman you see in Superman and Lois is not the Superman that you saw in the Arrowverse and Crisis on Infinite Earths and Supergirl. But it tells a story of Superman with Lois. They're married. They have teenage sons. They're on the farm in Smallville. They're having adventures. They're doing stuff, and it really does seem to capture the essence of the character very well. Like he has an edge to him. Like there's a scene in one of the episodes where this jerk local asshole decides to beat up one of the Clark's sons, beat up one of their sons, and threaten Lois. And then Clark, as Clark, not as Superman, goes to a diner where he's hanging out, where his daughter works, and is like, and this is like a famous scene, you can find this on YouTube, and he's like, listen, you did this, you did that, let's go outside, let's you and me, let's talk. He's like, I ain't going anywhere with you, it's just giving him an attitude. It's Clark Kent. Like people in Smallville don't necessarily know Clark Kent as being like a bumbling idiot or a coward, but they don't know him as being like a badass either. He's just like, a regular guy. And he's like, no, we're going out. And like Lana is with her, I think her husband or her boyfriend, and the boyfriend's gonna like step in. He's like, Clark, you don't know this guy. He's a bad customer. It's like Lana, no, because Lana knows. Like, no, he's got this. And
I'll be right back, guys.
Yeah, and then he's like, I don't want to do something with your daughter. Let's go outside. He's like, no, and he basically, I think he hits him in the face and like breaks his hand, and like that's all he needed. Like that's something a human being could do, right? With sufficient strength and coordination. It's like you will not do this to my family and my town, and like that's where the kind of line is. It's like he will lay down the law to the extent that is appropriate, but he's not going to be brutal for its own sake, and he's not going to be like super edgy and dark. Like in general, most of the stories are like him trying to battle the parasite before she takes over the world. Some minor spoilers. Or, him meeting John Henry Irons and like learning about the multiverse and fighting Bizarro and all that sort of stuff. It's like just classic Superman stories, just getting back to the essence of the character.
But he's not like leaving a horse head in anyone's bed or doing any chopping off fingers.
Yeah. No that. Mario Puzo, no Godfather, no Snyder, no Goyer. And so, the essence of the character is coming through. And so, I would love to get Zeus's thoughts on this when he comes back, but to kind of bring it to all the way to the present day and to bring it to the James Gunn of it all. And I have mixed feelings on Gunn as well as I have on Snyder, as well as the writers. Gunn, for his part, is a writer. Snyder's less so that, especially on the DC side. People often think like, oh, he's the director. And they have this like sort of auteur theory, shorthand way that people talk about movies like, oh, the director does all the thing. The director, the way some people talk about movies, they think the director is literally the cinematographer shooting the movies by hand, the writer writing the scripts himself with nobody else, and then like the actors just act, and that's it. It's a lot more complicated than people realize sometimes. But anyway,
no, just back to since you got back to the movies and Snyder.
yes.
You know, Zeus said he liked it. I actually I didn't hate the first one. Like I liked a lot of the things Zeus liked about it. I think like the showdown with Zod, but I remember the knock. You're right. It was a matter of sort of subverting expectations. And people did go to the theater. Maybe they weren't ready for the return of Superman in 2006, but they were definitely expecting something more like it with Man of Steel, I think. And they got this darker, grittier, brooding Superman roaming. You know, he's up in the North Pole he's working with fishermen on offshore boats, and you know, he's just looking buff and brooding, and you know, the tornado with his dad and all of this, like it. But I remember the real knock. The movie that I enjoyed the most out of the three was, because I'm a big Frank Miller Dark Knight fan, was I liked a lot of the imagery and story of Batman versus Superman, the second one. Like that was up my alley. But the knock on that, I remember at the time, Quinn, there were stories of children were leaving the theater crying because people, like parents, brought, you know, their kids to go say, hey, it's Superman and Batman in the same movie. This is gonna be great. And it's like this nightmare
they didn't get what they
vision.
Thought. Yeah,
it's this nightmare vision of like the worst that could happen. You know what I mean? And so yeah, the people weren't ready for it, and unfortunately, I remember DC. They knew that, and so with Justice League, they were like, okay, we got to switch gears into Marvel land really, really, really fast, and that's why we got the piece of garbage that was Justice League, at least the one they released initially.
Like I like the Zack Snyder version of that.
I'm talking about when they put it out in the theater.
Sure, the theatrical cut. Sure,
and it's not good, and I remember thinking that at the time. But anyway.
So the central creative voice. Sorry, just real quick. The central creative voice in terms of the script, the glue to those films is Chris Terrero. So people should know that name. They can IMDb it or Wikipedia it. But like he wrote BVS, and he co-wrote BVS with David Goyer, and he co-wrote Justice League with Joss Whedon and Zack Snyder. And Zack Snyder had to leave the project because of personal tragedy. His daughter died. Yes.
Right? Yep.
Yes. And so Joss Whedon was brought on, I believe, on Zack's recommendation or someone's recommendation. And
he did the Avengers, right?
Yeah, he did the Avengers. Joss Whedon did the Avengers. And the mandate, and this was already a time when the studio was meddling with the property to begin with. Like they were doing some meddling on BVS and doing some meddling on Justice League. And they're like, just tone all this dark, grim and gritty stuff down, and let's try to have like a proper, you know, like light, bright superhero movie. And so that's what they did, for better or worse. And they also that was also when they did the awful CGI on Cavill's face because he had a mustache for the Mission Impossible movies, and for some reason Sony said he couldn't shave it, and so yeah, it was a mess. But regardless, yeah, it's just. So I cut you off, Zeus, but like, yeah, we're basically talking about like the movies again, and like
they're overall I even like Justice League, but because for me it was more of like fanboy, just wanted to see all my characters all together, and I thought there were some funny scenes like Aquaman sitting on the lasso of truth or whatever.
Oh sure,
and she's super hot. Like I found some of the humor in it very good. The one thing that I hated in Batman versus Superman, and this is most people agree with this one, is the Martha quandary.
Why did you say Martha?
Like they're fighting to the death. They're fighting to the death, and he's like, "Don't say Martha." And he's like,
"Why'd you say that name? Why'd you say that name?" Yes.
And then like, let's go save the world.
Your mom's name is Martha. My mom's name is Martha. Did we become just best friends? Or, like, it was very
It was like, let's go save the world.
Me, kind of dumb, but at the same time, it was very like aggro and aggressive because it's a heightened, like third act moment. Yeah, again, it's like
I like the path they were going more towards the what is the one where Superman goes dark and he becomes like Hitler, Injustice. Injustice.
Yeah,
I like that they were
yeah.
going down that route, and I wish they would have gotten to go further because that's a really interesting time. But I did like certain scenes, like the one scene where he comes back and he's wearing the mullet Superman costume, the black one. And,
sure, the black suit.
And the Flash is running around and he thinks he's too fast for Superman, and Superman just kind of looks over and he's like, "Yeah, I see you there." You know the scene I'm talking about?
So that I don't know if that's the Snyder cut of the original, but and it's been a minute since I've watched them, but yeah, I know the beats. Like there's a lot to if you're forgiving and you're looking at it just in the sense of like, hey, it's the first time you've seen the Justice League on film. It's the first time you've seen a lot of these. This is a lot of firsts for
like
the movies.
For Darkseid to be in it, that would have been great.
Sure. But at the same time.
The bad thing about the movie for me was that they tried to take too many amalgamations of the Superman character and put them into the one movie. Like the black costume Superman was.
Yeah, that's when he comes back from that was the death of Superman.
Yes. Yes. I mean,
isn't that when he got the mullet? Isn't that when he got the
so
in the front or business in the front, in the back?
Yes. He had a mullet in the 90s. That was the same era. So basically,
horrible.
So basically, he dies in BVS. I'm gonna get spoilers. These movies are like what 10 years old now. He dies in BVS, and they bring him back in Justice League. That's a huge plot point of those movies. And so they are essentially adapting a version of the death of Superman. Literally, Doomsday or a version of Doomsday shows up in BVS and kills Superman, and then he comes back to life through the mother boxes in Justice League. And there's too much going on. And Zack Snyder said, he liked a lot of these stories, and he likes sort of the edgier stories. He likes 300. I think he likes 300 for what you could say are the right reasons. He likes Watchmen. Would you could say for the wrong reasons? Due respect, because
Watchmen was fucking epic.
I love Watchmen.
Watchmen is a fucking amazing.
You can like what you like, and that's cool. But I remember watching it in the theater. I think I was with my dad, but either way, I remember watching it in the theater, and I was like, oh. This was made by, and again, he had a writer on that. I think he had some help with the script, but it was primarily somebody else. I think his name was it's another Zach with an H. But regardless, he had another writer on it. But I was watching. It's like, oh, because I literally read Watchmen recently at the time. Mm-hmm. This is written by somebody who loves the visuals. It's like they get the flash, but not the substance. They love the visuals and the edginess of it. If you're gonna watch a Zack
Snyder movie, you're gonna get
but
epic visual.
But wait a minute, Quinn, you don't think that the Watchmen movie captured the miniseries? As far as the story?
No. It was comic accurate.
So, and this is okay. Now, literally, this is my PowerPoint. Comic accuracy. What does that really mean? Can it be measured? We can measure this. Okay, and this is a recurring thing that I talk about. I try not to do debates, especially on the internet, because they're cringe.
It's a different medium. They're not going to capture every little detail of a comic anyway.
Absolutely. But we're talking about sort of the soul of the thing. We're not just talking about visuals. We're not just talking about plot points. We're talking about, do you understand what you read and what you saw, and can you render that correctly? It's like doing a book project, right? You can tell, teacher can tell, and I didn't ever teach, but I was in line to maybe be an assistant back in my college days. You can tell when somebody's done the reading, and you can tell when they've actually understood the reading versus when they're just kind of going through the motions. It very much felt like Watchmen was, I saw this, I read this, I loved the visuals. I have no idea what the actual subtext is. I couldn't tell you what Frank Miller is actually saying. I don't understand why.
That was Frank Miller?
No, it was Alan.
Alan Moore. My bad. Alan Moore. But Alan Moore, Dave Gibbons. But I understand what Alan Moore is saying. I just really like it because it's cool and edgy and gritty. It's just all right. But if we're I can give you a perfect example. And this is not even just because it's different, like a change from the comic. This is literally it shows you, I think, it just in this plot point, this scene, how he doesn't get it or how they don't get it. Because I think it was co-writing between him and somebody else. I'm
gonna disagree with you pretty hard on that. I think
I got you.
He hasn't gotten to it. What's the
So in the comic, Rorschach's like his origin, his defining moment that really like changes him from just a costume vigilante that's trying to do the right thing, but isn't like super sort of far gone, edgy, like all the criminals are scum, into what he becomes. Is he handles a kidnapping, and he finds the guy
with the
who,
dog.
And so in the comic, there is basically the kidnapper. It's shown he kidnapped the girl, it seems like for ransom, and they just didn't know what to do. And then he got rid of the body. But there is no indication that he's a pedophile. That's important. And Rorschach, for his part, says, all right, so I'm going to lock you in this house. I'm going to leave a saw. It's like kind of like the movie Saw, you know, with Jigsaw and all that. I'm going to leave you in this house. I'm going to chain you to the radiator. I'm going to leave a hacksaw, and you figure it out. And he lights the house on fire, and he sits outside and he watches. In the movie, he just takes a meat cleaver and chops the guy's head. And that to me just shows the essence of Zack Snyder not getting, and whoever wrote with him not getting it. It's like the whole point is like, this is his character devolving, but still like leaving this other guy a chance to do something, figure it out. He's not just going straight to, I'm going to kill this guy because that's grim and edgy and bitter and dark. It's like, oh, you just don't get it. And so, like,
I don't know. I didn't find that difference that troubling.
There's a bunch of stuff.
There's
one example. There's a bunch of stuff.
There's so much Rorschach in the movie as well, that I felt pretty satisfied with the cap. But again, it's to each his own, you know. At that
to each his own.
You know what I mean? Right.
Yeah. When did Saw come out? Or when did Watchmen come out?
Watchmen, I believe, was 2000. I'll look it up.
I got my phone. Right?
Yeah, I was going to say 8 or 10.
The reason I'm asking is because if Saw came out before and you had a scene that was so similar to,
I'm not even saying he ripped off Saw.
I just think with the movie. With the movie, they cut to the chase. It's already a 3-hour epic at this point anyway. So it's like, all right, do we need to have this long drawn out sequence where he's going to handcuff him and he's going to leave an axe, he's going to sit outside and smoke, and if he comes out, he's going to kill him anyway. You know what I mean? Like, to me, that's forgivable. I mean, a lot of people were even getting upset that they didn't have the squid that they did at Nuclear. Right. I was okay with the nuke. I was I don't need...
Wait, what's the squid? I'm not familiar with
So in the comic, they changed the ending. Basically, the reason why in the ending, the thing that Adrian Veidt, Ozymandias, does to
the world.
To the world, and to kind of to make everybody, because this is set during the 70s, 80s, and it's like, and so like we're on the brink of nuclear war. The all the powers, post-war, the Cold War, they're gonna, Russia, so Soviet Union, America, China, whatever, they're gonna they're gonna blow each other up. And so Adrian Veidt sees all this happening, and he's like, all right, I need to create a new enemy to unite the world against so that doesn't happen. And so in the comic, he invents an alien, a giant squid, that's actually just a bioengineered life form that he made on Earth, and he like plops it down in New York.
It's a Project Bluebeam kind of
in the movie, he basically creates a bomb that's meant to imitate the powers of Dr. Manhattan, and he frames Dr. Manhattan for blowing up New York. Yeah, but like that, I don't mind. Like, I mean, that's a change.
It's a cool twist. Yeah,
some people really like that change. Some people think that makes it's one of the improvements on the comic. I just think if you like really go like scene for scene, and you're not just looking at the visuals, because Zack is a big visual guy. We agree. We understand. If you look, it's like a comic book. Visuals are not comic book accuracy. I'm sorry. That's a thing that sci-fi fans love to say. Visuals, comic book accuracy. It's so visually. No. Does he understand the story? Can he or the people that are writing his movies with him, can they tell me what these stories are about at their deepest layer? Can they tell me what Frank Miller was actually thinking? Can you tell me what Alan Moore was actually thinking? Can you tell me the subtext? Do they understand that? The answer I always get is no.
But didn't Alan Moore sign off on it and actually?
Oh, hell no. Alan. So fun fact on that. No. Alan Moore famously has had a number of his comics adapted, and he's had a very rocky relationship with DC and Warner Brothers. But back in, I believe, the 90s, after they adapted From Hell. I think it was From Hell. It might have been V for Vendetta in the 2000s. I think it was the 90s, From Hell with Johnny Depp. Either way, one of the movies they made off of his comics was like, that's it. I'm through with you. You've made too many mistakes. You burned the bridge. I hate you. I do not. I disavow everything. Alan Smithy, blah blah blah. And so, from his perspective, it's all crap. He has never said anything, I think, particularly positive. I think he's tried not to say anything in general at all about Watchmen, the film, but he has never said anything positive about Watchmen, the film. And his relationship with Warner Brothers and DC is like completely trashed. And he often, when he comments about comic books in general, he often sounds like a crabby old man. And I love Alan Moore. I think he's grandfathered in. He can say whatever he wants. Martin Scorsese say the same thing. Like if they say things that quote unquote nerds take offense to, hurts their little feelings, I don't care because they're grandfathered. They can say what they want. But he's said like, if you like Rorschach, you don't get it. Like Rorschach's not a hero. He's supposed to be fucked up and like not someone you're supposed to admire.
No, he was an anti-hero. He was
right. And you can tell that Zack Snyder doesn't get that. He doesn't get that Rorschach is not supposed to be cool. He's supposed to be someone that you look aghast at. Right. Zack Snyder thinks Rorschach is cool, and that's a perfect example of what I mean. So,
but bear with me. I don't think that he was portrayed as in an odd way. He was kind of the conscience of the movie. But in other ways, like in the prison, he burns a man's face for taking his food. Like he was an anti-hero, if anything. He was the Punisher of that universe. He was a dark, vicious monster. But again, he was also kind of the conscience of the movie, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, the one guy who seemed like an earnest crime fighter who was in it for the right reasons to some extent was the Night Owl.
Yeah,
from my recollection.
Yeah.
And I think that was, who was it? Patrick Wilson played him in the movie, I think.
Yes.
He seemed to be the guy. If there was going to be, even though Night Owl seems to be like their version of Batman in a sense with the gadgets and the and the outfit.
Right.
He seemed to be the one Boy Scout, if you could find one in that group.
Yeah.
No, we could agree to disagree. I like the movie.
Yeah, it's fine.
But I also I still have the original 12 issues of that too. So I'm a fan. I don't know if you want to get into the rest of these movies that you wanted to talk about.
We can. Because
I think we're getting short for time just because I happen to notice it.
No worries. So we're getting short on this anyway because basically my central thesis, and while I want to bring it to the current and the future with James Gunn, my central thesis is that comic book accuracy is not a subjective term. So we can have a subjective feelings about like whether or not we like something or not. That's a subjective thing. It's like I'll never be able to sell to someone you didn't like Watchmen or you did like Watchmen or that's different. But comic book accuracy can be measured, and so people get into arguments about like it was so comic book accurate. It's like point. We could have a whole debate, behind the scenes about that. And people can at me. We'll shout my socials out later. They can at me about this later. But that could be measured. But going back to Superman, and going to like the present day. To sort of sum up, I think we have to be, and DC and Warner Brothers have to be cognizant of the fact that adaptations have consequences. That if you're going to do a mainline Superman movie or a mainline Superman saga, like Zack Snyder's Man of Steel and BVS, et cetera, was supposed to be, it can't feel like an Elseworlds. Let's put it that way, right? You can't do all those, like edgy, dark things when it's supposed to be the main version.
May I interrupt 1 second?
Wait, no, let him finish his point.
Hold on, Jack. This is important. He keeps mentioning Elseworlds, and I don't think anybody but me knows.
Okay. So just to be, so that's a term.
It's like DC's version of the What If comics, right?
What If, imaginary stories.
DC's version of the Ultimate Comics in.
Sure. So basically, Elseworlds is a term that's applied to a line of comics that basically means this story is set in an alternate universe. It's usually a one shot, so it's
not canon.
It's not canon. Yeah, it's not canon to the main story. It's set in an alternate universe, and they're not connected to each other generally either. So it's not really Ultimate per se, because Ultimate's a shared universe, but it's separate from the main line. Keep it separate from the main line.
I've got a Batman one where he literally becomes a vampire because he gets bitten by. Yeah, right. It's a great one where he becomes a comic.
He becomes a Green Lantern. It's a bunch of stuff. Superman, Red Sun is in Elseworlds, for example. Right. So, point being, that's something you can do when you've already. Oh, perfect example. Joker, the movie, is in Elseworlds. Joker is in Elseworlds. The Batman, Matt Reeves, is in Elseworlds.
Yeah.
Mainline, right? Mainline, the stuff that James Gunn is going to be doing, and the stuff that potentially like Andy Muschietti and other people are going to be doing. Mainline is mainline, and so like now we're doing the the mainline Superman Legacy. Previously Legacy, now just calling it Superman with James Gunn. There's a lot of stuff coming out in terms of the casting. There's not a lot in terms of the story officially. And James Gunn has a kind of like almost cult of personality around him where he like, only I can tell you the truth. Don't believe anything you read in the news. Like, dude, news comes out. Like the Hollywood Reporter, Deadline, news comes out. You can't like be the only voice for your movie, but whatever. A lot of stuff is coming out with the casting, and a lot of this casting has been pretty good. Lex Luthor looks cool. Lois Lane looks cool. Superman looks great. Still the other choices I could take or leave, but
see, the one you don't like that I like is Nathan Fillion as the Guy Gardner.
well, the thing I dislike about that is just, wait a minute. So why are Hawkgirl, Green Lantern, Mr. Terrific, and the Authority in a Superman solo movie? So it's like I don't know.
That's a little bizarre.
I can't see the vision. We'll see.
It's a bit overkill in characters.
Yeah, like, we'll see.
Yeah.
Reserve judgment. But regardless, the main castings do seem to be good. I mean, I could take or leave Pa Kent, but regardless, that's a mainline movie. And so they have to be able to tell a story that matches up with the comics. And to be fair, the comics right now are a little bit of a mess themselves, but the central idea of Superman is basically remain the same. He's a good guy, all-American hero, does what's right, doesn't turn into a psycho, doesn't break people's necks. He knows where the line is. And so that's basically what they need to do, I think, if they want to be successful, because we've seen Superman and Lois, that ran 5 seasons, that was very successful, a lot of positive response. There's a way of telling these stories that will be responsive and be engaging and make money, let's be honest, with the audience. And I don't think it's to do counter programming. I think it's to try to hew to not just like comic book accuracy, but to like an essential aura of these characters. Like if you know these characters, that'll come through. And someone like me, right, will be able to say like, oh yeah, that is what they were going for. That is who they are. I believe it. Versus like, okay, you copied a comic book panel, but I don't feel it. You know what I mean? It's like, can you versus, can you play a song? Can you do a cover? But can you actually like, am I inspired? It's like you can do a cover of a song, but it doesn't give me the same feeling versus like, oh, wow, you actually did it. You actually like played that song, that kind of thing. So yeah. But
I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do. I'm hopeful just because like as far as Gunn goes, like on the one hand, I'm a little apprehensive because this isn't Guardians.
Yes.
This is not the Suicide Squad or one of these other ensemble things. This is friggin' Superman. And I know
Brightburn.
And he's right, it's not. And there's sort of a sacredness to the character like, that you're getting at. And Gunn seems so playful, like he's perfect for Rocket Raccoon and Star-Lord and the cast of Misfits and all the yucks and the jokes. Like that's his wheelhouse. Even Slither, right? The horror movie was very tongue in cheek, right? Very.
Yep.
This is friggin' Superman. I mean, say what you want about the return of Superman or whatever the
Superman Returns. Yeah, Brandon
Superman
Routh.
Returns. There was like an earnestness to it. Like it was trying to present the pure 70s type Superman
they were
movie.
paying homage.
Right.
Yes.
And I so I'm a little worried with Gunn, but at the same time, the guy makes good product. He cares about what he's doing. That seems apparent. from, and hopefully this wasn't just a money grab, like, oh, now I'm in charge of DC. I have all the toys. Watch what I can do. And
That's what I'm worried about.
And hopefully it's not, hopefully it's not, let's just throw the chess pieces up in the air and let me have fun with it,
Yeah.
But I mean, if a guy like Christopher Nolan could deliver the Batman movies, right? And he's a serious filmmaker, and he treated them very seriously, which is what was so great about them.
Mm-hmm.
What are we going to do? What are we going to do? What's that, Quinn?
But also comics accurate. This is the thing I fight about people sometimes. They were comics accurate. People talk about, they were comics. Yes, they were. They were the most comic book accurate Batman movies to date.
Except for like
Knight series. Overall Batman, not so much accurate, but for Dark Knight, absolutely. When we're saying accuracy, we have to also point out.
I mean, Batman
Begins adapts to comics primarily. We can go back and forth.
Batman since the Frank Miller Dark Knight Returns and the grittiness that Quinn talked about with the 80s and the 90s Batman, and then the basic origin story. The only thing that to me wasn't comic book accurate, if you wanted to like really like get into it, would be like the Bane character. I remember the Bane origin was different, but
Rise
is
a whole other thing. But
but I mean, other than that, as far as the depiction of the Joker, the depiction of the Batman origin, the League of Shadows, like all of that stuff seemed pretty accurate to me, and also very well made, earnest, cared about the substance of the character. So those movies were great. I mean, because you had a serious filmmaker say, okay, I'll take this serious character and I'll make a serious series of movies about it. Now, what I don't want to see with Superman, and I'm sure, I don't know if you were going to talk about the Superman that almost was, which was the Nick Cage project back in the day.
Yeah,
I don't want to see anything resembling what might. And I love Nick Cage. I love Nick Cage because he's Nick Cage.
Sure,
but he's not supposed to be Superman, and I'm glad that didn't happen.
Yeah.
I don't want to see anything like that, and so that's what I'm hoping we.
The casting, for the most part, has given me faith again. Like, I could nitpick here and there, Pa Kent, Otis, a few things. I guess, Perry is just canonized, like, ever since Man of Steel, he's black now. Like, that's fine, whatever. But like, in general, it looks good. Like, David Saren Wet, like, it looks like Superman. Like Cavill, he looks like Superman, and he's gonna be bulking up. Rachel Brosnahan from Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, my first choice, but still solid Lois Lane. Definitely, you can play the brassy brunette. They cast Jimmy basically off the internet. Like, he was the fan cast that everybody wanted, and he looks like the character. Like, their most out of the world, like out of the box picks are probably side characters like the Kents and some of Lex Luthor's hench people. Other than that, it looks solid as hell. There's a casting. That's one thing, but we won't know. We won't know until we know. We won't know until we see a trailer, until we see the film.
I just feel like it's character heavy, and that worries me that they're going to go with a Guardians of the Galaxy thing, which I don't want.
Yeah, too crowded. It's supposed to be a solo film, so that's a problem. But we'll see. Maybe he'll make it work. We don't know.
Well, anyway, it's getting pretty late here.
Yes.
If you don't mind, I think Jack, you have some words that you like to say at the end of our episodes. If you'd like to.
If I could do one thing.
Oh, sure.
Let Quinn tie a bow on it, man.
I'm sorry.
Well, no, I was like, tie a bow on this, but also just put my socials. So, just to tie a bow on it, my feeling is that, and as much as it might seem like it, because Superman is actually not even my favorite character. My favorite character is probably like Batman and Green Lantern, but he's definitely up there. Superman was a big character for me when I was a kid, and I've obviously stayed with him. You can write whatever you want to write. You can like whatever you want to like, but it's like, I don't remember who said it online, but basically, you need to know how to do the thing correctly first. You need to know how to paint a mosaic, let's say, before you do impressionism, abstract impressionism. And that's why I feel like people sometimes miss with art. It's like they want to do the bold, crazy thing first without getting the fundamentals down, or without understanding like the why and the how and the origins. And so I would just encourage people.
How Batman Begins did. They established the character and then moved forward. That makes
Exactly.
sense.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And it was a mainline story. So like they had to kind of hew to some certain things they couldn't necessarily do if they were doing an Elseworlds. So yeah, so like that kind of thing. Like if you want to do Joker on the side. If you want to, you know, the Batman, do the Batman on the side. You want to do Penguin on the side. But make sure you have a mainline story that gives the audience what they want and expect, you know, as like counter programming. And so that I think is a recipe for success. I'm hoping that that's what we see more going forward in the comics and in the films and the TV shows. I am Quinn Q. You can find me online. I live on the internet. I often joke. My handle is Edo Quinn. That's EDOKWIN. I'll probably make a comment under this YouTube video. I use the same name for my YouTube account. But yeah, this was great. Thank you guys for having me. Sorry if I kind of dominated the conversation, but
no,
you know.
I learned a lot.
No, it's great. It was good talk.
Hey, Quinn, thanks, man. Good to meet you.
Yeah, very good to meet you.
Take care, buddy.
All right, guys. Yeah, we've been on for a while, Quinn. We appreciate it, and we'll see you all next time. I think it's time to wrap things up, so we're gonna do that.
Cool.